As we move towards unrestricted weddings and everyone taking responsibility for their safety and those around us, it's helpful to use a simple risk matrix to understand how different risks balance each other out. And the fact that it's not as simple as something being safe or not, it's that combination of different activities. And each of them are likely to impact on either the probability of an outbreak or the severity and therefore the impact on the community if there is an outbreak. And the aim throughout this is to keep as many activities into that bottom left green safe zone, and anything that starts going into the red zone, so top right, where there's a high probability and a high severity if it does happen, it's worth just looking at different things that we can do to reduce those risks. So what changes as we move into unrestricted weddings is that the various aspects that the government have been restricting up until now are those very aspects that prevent these big, severe outbreaks. So things like being cautious when there are highly infectious strains of COVID, reducing the number of guests to an absolute minimal, reducing the amount those guests mix with each other and encouraging them to wear masks and not do any activities that might be considered higher risk. So all of those will be changing as we go to unrestricted weddings. And that does mean that we need to make sure we reduce the probability of an outbreak so that we don't need to worry about the severity. Ultimately, if COVID doesn't come into that wedding, if you've got COVID-free attendees to start with, then there shouldn't be anything to be concerned about because you're not going to have an outbreak. So COVID testing is the really, really obvious answer for that. And the advice is very much to be testing immediately before the wedding. So before you leave home for a wedding, encouraging all of your guests to be doing the same. And after the wedding as well, the lateral flow test will pick up people when they're at their most infectious. So if you were just on a sort of rising arc during the wedding day, it's really, really important to know immediately after the wedding. If you are infectious at that point, it's quite possible you were infectious throughout the wedding day and should perhaps be letting people know. So other than testing, there's various other things that will impact on the risks of a wedding. Guest numbers we know all about. So as the number of guests increase, the probability of one of them bringing COVID in, and also the number of other people that they could infect all increases. So reducing guest numbers automatically will help. But as we've already said, just reducing other risk factors, if you've got a lot of guests, will bring them into that safe zone as well. If you are COVID testing all of your guests straight away, we know you're going to be in that bottom left corner. If COVID can't come in, it can't spread. The other things to be looking at, high risk guests. So whether it's their job, their social life, or the area that they come from, we know there's various higher risk areas. All of those will just increase that probability of COVID coming in, so suggesting more risk factors need to be used. Look at the severity. So this is particularly vulnerable guests, so the impact on vulnerable guests if there is an outbreak is much greater. You'll know your guest list. You'll know your guest list more than your venue will. Do you have a lot of vulnerable guests, and do you have a lot of people coming from areas where they are higher risk or higher risk guests for other reasons? If so, you just need to be a little bit more cautious than you might otherwise. And we can also look at the risk mitigators, so the simple steps you can take on any of your activities. So if we use dancing as an example, as soon as you've got a crowded dance floor, the severity of any outbreak starts to increase. So you can see why there's this suggestion that you just need a little bit more space on your dance floor. And there's also been that encouragement to add ventilation. And you can see what would happen if you had an unventilated, crowded dance floor. The probability and severity both increase and you start going into the red zone. That sort of thing is really, really simple for most couples, just to bring that risk level down. A couple of other major factors that I think the government are likely to be looking at over the next few months are the number of people mixing. We know this has always been a concern, and also the number of different postcodes mixing. So those are affecting, obviously, numbers are affecting the severity, and the postcodes, so the higher risk areas, will affect the probability. And finally, a plea on behalf of everyone in the industry and all of the couples following your wedding. It's going to be really important that we keep suppliers and venue staff safe. They're doing wedding after wedding. You want to know that those suppliers and venue staff that are working at your wedding are going to be safe to be there. And for that to happen, it needs everyone to take that responsibility and make sure at your wedding that you're helping your guests keep the venue staff and suppliers safe as well. So when you're assessing your own wedding, what actions can you take? And this is going to come down to the absolute simple common sense of treating COVID just as you would any other risk factor. Think about it right the way across your life. It's just because this is new and has been very regulated that I think some people are uncomfortable about the risk assessments that they need to do. But it's just as any other risk. It's there, it'll sit there in the background, and we'll just make sure that we weave these slightly safer processes into all we're doing. So what you can do for your wedding is encourage testing, especially unvaccinated guests. Share your guest list with your venue. Let them know if there's people you're concerned about, or whether it's that they're vulnerable or higher risk, so you can make a plan around that. You know your guest list far better than your venue will. Consider each activity you're doing, how important it is, how you can reduce the risk if an element of it isn't important to you, and help keep your staff and suppliers safe for future weddings. We are going to be updating the risk factors as they change. At the moment, we are trying to ascertain what sort of things the government are concerned about, what venues are concerned about, what suppliers are concerned about. We're going to be keeping that list regularly updated, so do check back on that as often as you can. And we'd love your feedback on that as well, if there's anything additionally that you think we should be adding to that. Hopefully that has been helpful today, and we can all help keep weddings as safe as possible for future months and years. Thank you.